Everyone dreams about living an uncommon life, but how we define that dream is very different for each of us. And for most, it's a lifelong pursuit. Welcome to the Uncommon Life Project podcast. We're going to introduce you to people who are living that life or enjoying the journey to get there. We're going to also give you some tools, tricks, and tips for starting or accelerating your own efforts to live an uncommon life, a life worth celebrating and savoring. Please welcome your hosts, Brian Dewhurst and Philip Ramsey.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Uncommon Life Project. I am your host, Philip Ramsey, with
the Aaron Kramer.
Oh man, I can't wait. This is actually a good one, and we've been wanting to get this gentleman on the show for quite some time. This is a topic that everybody knows that you need to do as an adult. This is like adulting at its finest. We are talking about estate planning. We have a guest on the show. His name is Charles Bottenberg. He is an estate planning extraordinaire attorney that works downtown in Des Moines, Iowa at Allers and Cooney. Thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome to the show, my man, Charles.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. First, this is going to be amazing only because you have like a personality. There's not a lot of lawyers out there that I'm like, let's get them on the show, but you are one of those people.
Yes, Charles.
So thank you. Do you want to go by Charles or what do you want to?
Charlie, Charles, hey you.
Okay.
As long as it's not, that idiot over there, I'm usually pretty, I don't even go by my first name. My legal first name is Richard. So I'm used to just ignoring extraneous data thrown at me. So don't worry about that.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. My first question is, how did you get to where you're at today? And one, can you believe people pay you to do what you do? You love what you're doing. And I think that's probably what attracted me most about you and having you on the show is you absolutely love what you do. You love helping people and people pay you for it. So that's really the kind of genesis of the show. If you're the first time listener, we have a lot other like regular listeners, but if you're just first turning in because it is the one and only Charlie, I get it. Welcome to the show. So tell us, how did you get to where you're at today currently?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I am very happy that people pay me. So I'm going to start with that because I do have, student loans and a mortgage and all that. But no, my path to being an attorney is, I'm not going to say it's unique by any means, but I would definitely say it's atypical. So I came down to Drake University in the late 90s for undergrad. I actually have my bachelor's degree in biochemistry, cellular molecular biology, which is
amazing.
There's more than one attorney out there with that degree. In fact, one of my college roommates at one point in time, he ended up going to law school. So I know there's at least two of us out there with biochem degrees from Drake from the late 90s or early 2000s that are attorneys. But
that's fascinating.
I was not a model student in undergrad. I don't know. I just didn't like it. It wasn't my thing. I didn't try hard. I wasn't invested. I would explain it best as I didn't know what I wanted, and so I didn't try. Right, there was just not a whole lot of understanding of where I needed to go. So I got out of undergrad, got married, got a job actually in IT at Wells Fargo at a help desk. Started working
that was
there.
Your favorite job. That was your favorite.
That was
job.
my favorite.
Let's
job.
Just be honest.
It was a lot of fun and. It was one of the easiest jobs I've ever had. Not because it was, like, oh gosh, people are easy, but the tasks that they gave me were not overly strenuous, right? There was not a whole lot of mental energy used. So I recognized early on that I wasn't going to be happy in that long term. Not there's anything wrong with that, but my family kind of has a pretty good case of wanderlust, and you can't really sit still. So I went back to Iowa State and started my MBA. In my MBA classes, one of them was taught by I call him a reformed litigator. He was a litigation attorney and then went to be a strategic business analyst kind of thing. And then also a partner at a law firm up in Ames. And we just got, kind of chatting and they both sort of said, hey, your personality and the way you think just kind of matches law. That's something you should look at. Now, fun fact, the guy up in Ames claims to this day he told me not to go to law school, which, clearly is not true. I wouldn't have done it had he not pushed me. But he claims no responsibility for my life decisions, which is fair. That's 100% fair. So I said, okay, well, I didn't have the greatest undergrad grades ever, and that's, a problem. Took the LSAT, which is the law school aptitude test, did pretty well. I didn't ace the thing by any means, but I did well enough to get in for sure. Applied to 6-8 law schools, got into 3 or 4, was about to make my decision. And the day that I was going to make the day before I was going to make my decision, my wife told me she was pregnant with our second kid. And that pretty much ended my decision. Not that there's anything wrong with Drake University Law School. Had a great experience at Drake, and I'm really glad I went to Drake. But commuting to law school with one small child was going to be a ridiculously difficult task. With 2, I was like, nope, we're not even going to do it. Just going to stay and go to Drake, which has worked out really, really well because the opportunities that Drake offers, especially being here in Des Moines, being the only law school here in Des Moines, you just get exposed to a lot of things that other people have to travel for. So went to law school, finished law school. The job market back in 2012, 2013 was not awesome. Sort of said, hey, I bet we can just start a law firm. That can't be that hard, which, spoiler alert, it is. Stupid idea, but we did it anyway. And so 2 of us graduated, started a law firm, operated that from the beginning of May of 2013 to October of 2020 when we joined Allers and Cooney.
So let's talk about that little hiatus there, because I remember talking to you. Remember this?
Yep. Yes, that's what I was asking. That's before the show. I was asking, were you on that fateful call? Yep.
Yeah. And we talked to you and the partner at the time. And what were you
Jeremy.
trying to do exactly? Because I thought it was a brilliant idea.
So we were trying to essentially develop a mass marketable, streamlined, for lack of a better term, uncomplicated estate planning tool that would allow someone from the comfort of their home to log into, we wanted, bank security, very secure website, fill in personal details, answer a series of questions to sort of figure out, what options, if you will, within the estate plan do you need. And then the goal was basically at the end of it, it would kick out a fully formed estate planning packet, which they could then either come into our office for a small fee to have executed or have it emailed to them, and they could go to like a bank or somewhere else that would have a notary and a couple witnesses to effectuate the estate plan with some instructions on how to do that. And it was sad the day that we put the final nail in the coffin on that project. I still think in the grand scheme of things, it has, it's obviously there's big name companies out there that do those sorts of things. None of their documents are tailored to Iowa law, right? None of their documents understand the nuance and the complexities of the Iowa probate process. And so our theory was that there's a market for that. And there's, the goal was to go into, a company and offer it as like an employee benefit, right? Or go into a, we know a lot of first responders or public safety or police individuals go into an entire precinct or an entire fire department and just like these people need estate planning, right? They're in high stress, high conflict, sometimes dangerous jobs, and a lot of times they don't have any of those documents in place, right? So the theory was, how can we remove as many barriers to entry for people as possible? And then the flip side was we were trying to do it. For lack of a better term, as clean on a budget as we could, right? We're trying to make it very inexpensive.
Cost efficient.
Right. Basically cut the price down by, 2/3 compared to normal.
What was the final thing that made you have to put the nail in it?
The logistics of how to make it work with a 2-man law firm. Basically, we kind of needed to either make it our main focus or let it go. And it just didn't make sense to try to make it our main focus. There's too much work. It was like a 2-year process. We did a couple beta tests on some businesses, that are owned or run by friends of ours. It was really difficult to eliminate all of the manual labor portions. So the whole goal was that it just spit the document out and there was no manual labor involved, right? Like there was no actual input from a human being that was necessary. And it just never materialized. I'm sure somebody who is smarter than me could have made it work.
Well, also
was just
too,
one of those,
it
just didn't fit.
You had a growing family and obviously some needs there. You had student loans you've already talked about. Like we got bills.
Yeah.
And my practice was taking off and doing really well. So it's kind of like one of those, okay, I'm going to have to give up, the left hand to make the right hand work. And that didn't, anyway, it would have involved a lot of traveling as you go out to I'm going to go to Storm Lake, or I'm going to go to, and it would take maybe a day or two of travel to get up there. And it just didn't, it was a project for a single person or somebody who didn't have small kids. And both of us were not single, and both of us had small kids. So not exactly overly functional.
Maybe timing. So, okay, let's go into this, because I really do want to focus on why is getting an estate plan for you and your wife, will and trust, why is it important? And I think this is something that as you get older, you have to do. But so let's just talk a little bit about that whole aspect of it, and kind of for our listeners, just why would you even want to think about this, or why do people do it? That kind of question.
Super important.
Yeah, absolutely. So what a lot of people don't understand is whether you have an estate plan or not, you have an estate plan. Okay, what does that mean? That's lawyer talk, right? You're not making any sense here. So the Iowa Code, Chapter 633, has basically a default estate plan that the Iowa legislature over the course of many years has assembled for every single individual who dies subject to the jurisdiction of Iowa. And it lays out, when you die, this is where your stuff is going to go. And as a default estate plan goes compared to some of the other states that I have examined, it's actually not that bad. I think it makes a lot of really good assumptions. I think it makes a lot of very logical assumptions that for most people are going to relatively flow where they want it to go.
Oh, sweet. So we don't need to do anything. No, I'm just kidding.
Here's the problem. One, if you have small kids, the Iowa default does not limit, basically, depending on the type of asset. So we're subject to something called the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act. Basically, it's a fancy way of saying, hey, you're under the age of majority. You can inherit assets, but you can't directly control them. The problem is the way that Uniform Transfers to Minor Act works is those funds come out of that custodial account and they go into the hands of that beneficiary, 18, 19, 20, 21, somewhere in that range. There's a whole bunch of factors that are involved in that. But most of my clients would prefer to see that number be, say, 25 or 30 or an age where, a little more maturity has taken over. So that right there is a huge problem. Two, I don't know that's ever been true in society, but the default that the code kind of goes with is it works really well if you're on your first relationship, or you don't have kids from a previous relationship, or you're married. Maybe you're domestic partners, but you're not married. And in today's society, you have more and more blended families. You have more and more, what would not be the quote unquote 1950s traditional relationship sort of a thing happening, which I honestly think has always been there. It's just maybe not been as noticeable to people. But anyway, so for instance, if I'm married and I have a child from a previous relationship and I pass away, the Iowa default is that my child from a previous relationship gets half of my non-jointly owned assets, and my spouse gets half of my non-jointly owned assets. Well, that might work great if, I married my spouse when my child was, 6 months old, because I had just come out of a relationship or just gotten divorced or whatever that was, and we got married, and they're sort of, I was a single parent and they're sort of raising them together, and that's kind of what you would want. But does that make sense if you get married in your mid 50s and you've accumulated most of your wealth and you're trying to keep stuff separate and you don't have a prenup or anything like that? Maybe not. Or what happens when in that same scenario, you get married, kind of we call it the Brady Bunch Plus, where, you come to the relationship with kids, your significant other comes to a relationship with kids, and then you have a kid together, right? The way that the code handles that is very logical, but in my experience, not very in line with how people are expecting those sorts of things to happen. For instance, most of the time, people would leave a life insurance policy or two to take care of the kids, and they would want the bulk of their assets to go to their spouse in order to help their spouse live, because they view that as this is the priority of what I'm trying to do. Well, the default obviously doesn't take that into account. Or sometimes it's the opposite. Hey, my spouse is, independently wealthy. They don't need any of my stuff. It needs to go to my kids. Well, the default code doesn't take that into account. It's a very, math related, cold calculated. This is what we're going to do, which again, for a sizable chunk of people might work. But the number of times that we run into situations where it doesn't work is very, very high. And then the other thing that we run into, or at least I run into a lot, is when I'm planning for families and we sit down and we talk about, who is that person or persons who you would want to take care of your minor children if something happened, not every time is there an instant answer that both parties agree on.
I was going to say that. I think that one of the reasons I've seen so many people struggle to get this process done is you have to have some really hard conversations with your spouse. Like that. Like, who's going to take your child?
Yep.
Yeah.
It can be.
Then I know, like me and my wife, it was a hard conversation for us. And then we get one, and then our attorney was like, "All right, now, but you need a second one too." And you're like, "What? It was hard enough to find one."
We do like backups. We really do like backups. Yeah. Well, and so here's the thing, and here's where I was going with that. The number of times that we're planning not because I want this person to be in charge of my kids, and it's I want to make sure this person is not in charge of my kids would shock you. I mean, out of 10 people, 3 or 4 of those conversations are, okay, well, I don't know that I really care, but it can't be your mom. Or I don't know that I really care, but it can't be your sister or your brother or your cousin or your dad. Or, there's just someone in their family, because let's be real, family dynamics exist. There's someone in their family that's toxic or that isn't, maybe it's siblings and they were raised together, but they have very different worldviews, and one spends a lot of money on everything and doesn't, understand how to save or how to budget, and the other one is the exact opposite. Well, you probably wouldn't want, like, those worldviews just conflict. You may love your sibling, right? You may get along with your sibling outside of financial conversations, but if your parenting style and that person's parenting style or fiscal responsibility style aren't a good match, you may not want them raising your kid because you want your kid to follow your idea, not their idea, right?
Yeah. And Charlie, another dynamic people don't realize too when they're talking about money is, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, you're the expert, but you can, whoever's the beneficiary of your child, if you don't set it up and you both spouses die, they also control the funds for that child as well, don't they?
Not always, but I do think if somebody is qualified, so essentially what you're talking about, so there's two different legal paths. You have what's called guardianship and you have what's called conservatorship or custodialship. Guardianship is over the physical person, right? So if I'm the guardian of someone, I am in charge of their physical person. Yep. I have choices over where they go. If we're talking about a minor child, I can sign off on medical procedures. I can check them in the daycare. I can sign permission slips. I can do all the things that a parent would be able to do. The conservator or the custodian is the person who's in charge of finances. Yep. Sometimes it's the same person. Sometimes it's not. If you don't have anybody named and you need a custodian, because that's typically what you would set up, or a conservator, if the individual is qualified to be the guardian, I would say probably 97 times out of 100, they're also going to be the conservator, or they're also going to be the custodian, unless it's a situation where they don't want to be.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, you may agree with their parenting style, but you're like, you're really bad with money, and I'm worried that, this life insurance policy that I'm leaving behind, somebody leaves behind $1 million in life insurance, right?
Well, money changes people.
They want their kids taken care of. Well, so I'll give you a personal example, right? So I have 3 kids, and I'll give you a personal example only in the fact to say that I have 3 kids. The rest of this is 100% made up. So if any of my in-laws or whatever hear any of this, it's not you. I promise. It's not. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. It just doesn't exist. It's purely hypothetical. So I got the lawyer stuff out of the way. So I have 3 kids.
Good job.
Right?
Compliance is off your back.
Yeah.
That's good.
No, that's, you got to get that out there. But so, if I'm leaving, if the guardian of my children also has 3 kids and something happens to my wife and I, and they go from a family of, 5 to a family of 8, there's some real logistical challenges involved. One, does your house fit that many children? Well, most people's houses don't. right? We're not, I mean, unless you have a really big house, most people's houses don't have enough bedrooms to make all that work. Now you can squeeze people together. You can find ways to make that work. You know, if it's in-laws, it's, you know, let's get all the cousins, let's get the girl cousins in some rooms, get the boys cousins, you know, whatever. You can make that work. But a lot of times, especially in bigger cities where people are, you know, they have the exact amount of space they need, you're talking about an upgrade. Well, who's going to pay for that upgrade? Is that upgrade going to come out of the trust fund? Is that upgrade going to come out of the funds of, you know, that are meant for the kids? Same with a car, right? So if you have a family of 2 kids and you have a Honda Civic and all 4 of you fit in it, great. Well, I dump my 3 kids on you. Guess what? You don't fit. Guess what? You're going to have to go buy like a conversion van or a Suburban or, you know, something that may have a 6-figure price range. Well, okay, who's going to pay for that? Again, you know, I think most reasonable people would say, you know, yeah, well, the kids are the ones, you know, me dying is technically it, but the kids are the ones who are sort of forcing this situation. Their funds should perhaps help with some of those expenses. Well, long-winded way to get to my point. Here's my point. If the person who is in charge of spending the money is also the person who is in charge of the people, i.e., they're the guardian and the conservator and the trustee and the custodian, the only person really that they have to convince that it's a legitimate expense is themselves. And I think, you know, it's not common to have issues like these, but you know, the adage is if you have an issue where the trustee is misappropriating funds or they are overspending funds, a lot of times it's because they're also the guardian and there's not those checks and balances. So a lot of times we'll actually separate those roles, and when we're naming them inside of a will or a trust or whatever, we'll name, you know, one person as the guardian and a separate person as the trustee, and that can be because, you know, the guardian is suited for taking care of kids and the trustee is not, or that can be because the trustee is really good with money and the guardian is not, or that can just be, you know, hey, we want to make sure there's some checks and balances. And there's other ways to do that. There's, you know, naming a third party who's responsible for receiving and approving trustee reports. But you know, the key there is, it's a lot harder to have financial malfeasance when people are looking over the shoulder. And you know, there's never an easy way of saying this. As an attorney, you tend to kind of get a dim view on humanity sometimes because nobody picks up the phone and says, hey, things worked great. I did all those things you told me not to do, and it worked great. No one ever does that, right? I get the phone call of, hey, so I know you told me not to do those things. I did them anyway, and it blew up in my face. Can you help me fix it, right? So no one calls me and says, hey, we had the same guardian and the same trustee and it worked out fine, right? Like, but you do get the calls or you do see the cases, because when you're reading through the case law, no one sues because it went well, right? They only sue because it didn't go well. So you do tend to get a little bit of a jaded perspective, but generally speaking, when funds are misappropriated, it's usually because there's not proper reporting or there's not proper procedures of looking at things. And our legislature has taken some major steps recently in redoing the whole conservator process, in, you know, requiring annual reports, requiring a lot of those things to be looked at and approved by the court. But at the end of the day, you know, somebody who has an estate plan, who has a trust, that may not be court supervised, and so there's just some logistics that are involved in there.
It's funny because when you start talking about your lawyer language, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. But then you slipped in an example. I'm like, oh yeah, that is a problem. That is a problem right there. Like, so when you kind of give examples, it's like, oh yeah, that's something good to think about. So
I've learned over the years that people appreciate the example because the lawyer language goes over their head. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, which shouldn't, but it sure does. So what questions should our listeners kind of be thinking about in their head before they come to you to get like a will and trust done?
Yeah. So I actually have a pretty common process among estate planning attorneys. I actually don't ask people to have any of those decisions made before they come and talk to me. And I also don't charge people to come and have that conversation with me.
That's a big deal.
Because look, at the end of the day, people are usually afraid of getting an estate plan for 2 reasons. One, they think they're going to kick the tires and they're going to get a bill from the attorney, which is fair. That happens sometimes. Or 2, they think it's going to be a really, really, really difficult process. And the favorite thing that I hear at the end of almost all of my estate plans is, wow, that was really easy. And the answer is, it should be really easy. This is not difficult. It's hard, right? Some of these decisions you have to make, some of these decisions that you have to think about, some of these concepts can be mentally taxing, but the process itself shouldn't be overly difficult. Now, that said, when somebody calls in or emails in, we have a standard questionnaire form that we send out. It has a lot of biographical information. What's your name, address, phone number, your birthday, same for your spouse, same for the kids, some real rough, give me some idea of what your assets are. And a lot of people, I used to get a lot of questions on that. I haven't recently, but I used to get a lot of questions. Well, how come you need to know? That seems kind of personal. Well, one, I'm in your business, right? Like, there's nothing more personal than I'm going to help somebody take care of your kids after you die. So you want me to have that information. And two, how do you plan for something that you don't know what it is? So here's what I want you to do. I want you guys as financial planners, I want you to develop a retirement plan for somebody who's going to retire in 27 years, but you have no idea what their income is and you have no idea what their assets are. And the answer, of course, is you can't, because how are you going to do that without the information?
Going to be kind of hard. It's going to be kind of hard and very generic.
And it's probably going to miss the mark, right? Like, sure, we can throw something together, but it's going to miss the mark. And as an example, there's huge difference in tax consequences depending on the type of asset you're leaving. Are you leaving a retirement account, pre-tax 401k, IRA, 403b, SEP, any of that stuff, 457, or are you leaving life insurance? Are you leaving a stock account? Well, how those things are taxed on the back end is drastically different, and that may make a change in how your plan is set up. And the number of times that, I used to get, well, I don't want to give you that information. And I would have to say, okay, well, then your plan is probably not going to work very well. And you get a weird look, right? Like, well, then why would I use you? Well, the answer is, you can't. Anyway, so we ask for generic information. And I don't mean like, $57,842.46 in the checking account. I mean, like, I got roughly 60K, right? Looking for real rough numbers.
Yeah.
And then, the last 3-4 pages of my estate planning packet are, well, what do you want to see? And here's 3 examples. Do you want everything to go to your spouse and then your kids? Do you want it to go to your kids straight? Like, what do you want to see? And people, typically either write something down or I actually expected everyone to write stuff down. More people just circle the one they want. And I was like, hey, that's actually really smart. I should have put a checkbox there. But and then the last few pages are, okay, so who's making medical decisions for you if you can't make your own, right? If you're married, 9 times out of 10, you're going to pick your spouse. But if it's a subsequent marriage, sometimes people will pick their own kids instead of their spouse, right? So if you're in your 60s and your kids are in their 30s, and you get remarried, you may still want your kid as the one who's making medical decisions and financial decisions, because you have a longer relationship with that person than you do with your new spouse, right?
That can get hard though, because when I started getting asked those questions, I was like, if my wife was out of the, she was also incapacitated if we're both were. Like, who would you want to do that? I was like, oh man, I started going through my brothers, and I mean, Anthony, if you listen to this, I'm sorry, but I'm going to use you as an example. But I was like, oh man, his heart is way too big. He would not pull the plug on me, and he'd make my family go bankrupt. Because it's like, he's too loving. He has too big of a heart. So it's not like a bad thing, Anthony. It's just, so I'm like, I got to find somebody that's a little colder to be able to pull the plug on me.
Well, and then on the flip, this is perfect. This is a great segue. And then you don't want too cold, right? So I call that one the anti-mother-in-law provision, where no one wants their mother-in-law to be the one who gets to pull the plug. Because I love my mother-in-law, and she would not pull the plug on me unless it was 100% necessary. But no, so a lot of times people pick each other or pick the spouse as the primary. But I deal with a lot of people who are not married, right, or are not in a relationship. Well, then who is it, right? Who is that person, and then who's that backup? And for, 2 people, husband, wife, 2 kids, been married for 15 years, the quote unquote normal. And I don't mean that, but you know what I mean? It's what society calls normal these days.
Yep.
That can be a very, very difficult decision. And on a medical stuff, not normally, a lot of times spouses pick different people, right? People pick their own sibling or their own parent, etc. Well, then we do the same thing for financial. And I not every attorney does this, but I actually request or humbly ask, and I'll do it the other way if people want to, but, hey, you guys should pick the same backup. And everyone looks at you like, well, why would we do that? And the answer is, if you have a joint checking account and you need to make sure, and keep in mind that this all made a lot more sense before autopay, because autopay is a thing and that kind of, takes care of most of this stuff. But if you have a bill that needs paid, you don't need 2 people with the ability to pay that, because just think about a group project that you did back in high school or college or whenever the last group project you did was, and two people are responsible for doing something. What happens is either A, and this is the one that you want to happen, both people do it and a bunch of work got duplicated, which is not the end of the world. It is on a group project, but in this particular case, your bill got paid, so it's not the end of the world. But the more common one is option B, and that is neither one does it because the other one thinks they're doing it. So we normally say, hey, you should pick the same person. A lot of times, if we're naming a trustee for kids' funds, it's that person because it's kind of the same role, but it's you're alive but incapacitated versus the trustee is you've now passed and they're managing funds for the kids. So a lot of times you can just sort of slide that through there, and then the other two big decisions, and I honestly I think these are probably the more important decisions, are going to be who's raising kids if something happens to you. And who's managing the kids' funds if something happens to you guys, and the raising is always the interesting one. That's the one that I want people to focus on because at the end of the day, if you die with nothing or you die with $10 million, somebody's got to raise kids, right? So Charlie, raising should be the important one. Yeah.
So I want to get into this quick because I know this is important. People don't realize they can do this, but it's like parenting from the grave. Because I know for us, when we set ours up, it's like I can't ever say this right, so you're going to have to correct me, but it's like a testamentary trust.
Testamentary, yep.
Yeah, there we go. And we have it set in there, my daughter gets so much money at so much time, pay for college, pay for house, but we get to be parents from the grave.
Yep.
And I think so many people and young parents don't realize that one. It's like, wait, I don't have enough money for a trust. Well, either do we, but we have life insurance policies.
Right.
So we're worth a lot more dead than alive. But
I would challenge that.
Well, financially. So
financially, not existentially, right? We know what you mean.
Yeah. So, but I think tell us more about how powerful it is, what you can go to the extent of being a parent from the grave.
Sure. So, ironically, very rarely do my clients take advantage of that. Very rarely do my clients do more than say, okay, I'm giving discretion to the trustee, and then, we're going to do some sort of a multi-phase payout where they get, X percent or X fraction at 25, and they get some more at 27 or 30, and then they get the rest at, 29 or 35, or, whether they want a relatively short distribution period or they want a more elongated distribution period. But you can do almost anything in a trust. I had a couple sets of clients who, ironically enough, are both of the Mormon faith, and I'm not, so I understand but don't understand, if that makes sense. But I know that going on a mission, and I think it's right after high school, 19 might be the right age. I'm not sure. Is really important to a lot of members of their faith. And so they've written into trusts that the trustee shall pay those fees. They shall do this. They shall do that. Not a may, but they shall. With the idea being that those funds have to be there, even if it not bankrupts, but even if it depletes the rest of the trust and it's not, the quote unquote best way to handle it, they want to make sure that those things can happen. That faith also apparently has two different levels of marriage, and I'm fuzzy on it, but my understanding is, one is what we would consider just a traditional religious ceremony, and then one is kind of a heightened or further ceremony. And one of the families wrote in cash gifts because, if their kid was going through that, they would be providing a cash gift. Well, if they're not there, the trust is to kick out a cash gift to sort of take advantage of that. Another really good example I have, and these people were Catholic, not Mormon, so it's totally different, but they have, I don't remember how many kids, multiple kids, five or six kids.
They're Catholic, so probably five.
Yeah. Well, my dad's one of 11. My father-in-law is one of 13. So, with only three, I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel apparently. But, so they have multiple kids and their age gap was very, very large. And I have an 8-year age gap between my oldest and my youngest. Their age gap, I want to say, was almost 18 years. Well, we put in place multiple funding formulas for the trust to take into that account and then move forward in time. What do I mean? So basically it was all based on the age of the youngest, with the idea being that their oldest, they had paid all these expenses for, right? They had completely raised their 18-year-old, but their 4-year-old, they had not. And, assuming nothing happened to them in the next few years, they would have paid for their 18-year-old's college. And at that point in time, their then 8-year-old, they had not. So they had basically a matrix that said, if we die, when we die, if the youngest is from this age to this age, this is the percentage formula. And basically the younger he was, the higher percentage of their estate that he got. And then as he got older, and I think the cutoff age was 22, i.e., you should be nearing the end of your college journey at that point if you're not already done, it sort of morphed into more of an even split across the board. And I thought that was a really artful way to handle, the youngest ends up with the short end of the stick scenario, right? And even in my own plan, my plan is just equal to the 3 kids. But I recognize that, and my kids go to Dowling, or my oldest goes to Dowling, my youngest 2 go to St. Francis. But so, by the time he graduates from Dowling, I will have paid a lot more for his education than I will have for my youngest. And so it's not quote unquote fair. And you can't see my air quotes because, we're remote here, but, and everybody else is on a podcast, you can't see me. But the overarching thing being that you can really do a thoughtful job if you want to, if necessary, if it makes sense in your situation, to try to, build some equity into your estate plan, taking into account that, you have age gaps and you have, needs gaps. Maybe one of your kids is special needs. Maybe one of your kids is, super high achieving. They may not need the same thing, right? They may not need the same plan. If you're in your 50s or 60s or 70s and you have a kid who struggled with addiction and struggled with homelessness and struggled with, the ability to just have a steady paycheck, and you have another kid who's a doctor, you would not treat them the same in the estate plan. No, you may leave them the same amount of money, right? Mm-hmm. You may have 2 kids in 2 different scenarios and you may leave them the exact same amount of money, but you should not hand the same amount of money over to the doctor that you hand over to the person who is struggling with addiction, right? You can set up something called, a special needs trust or a discretionary trust or, a support trust. There's lots of different ways to handle it. But the long and the short of it here is,
you get to be parents from the grave.
You get to be parents from the grave. Yeah. And that's a really cold and calculating way to say it. It's kind of morbid for a Friday morning, but I like it. But you get to, you get to really continue to be a parent even past you're gone. And even if you don't want to do any of those extra fancy things, you're still being a parent from the grave because you're choosing who that person is to manage the funds and raise the kids. And I guarantee you that anybody listening to this, if they allow themselves to be honest with themselves and there's no one around to judge them, they have somebody in their family that they wouldn't want raising their kids. Or put differently, they have someone in their family who would not be the first choice for them to raise their kids. And they have somebody in their family who would not be the first choice to manage the kids' money. And they probably have the opposite. They probably have somebody who are like, yeah, that's the right person for the job. And you get to make those decisions when you have a plan. You don't get to make those decisions when you don't have a plan. Instead, you're asking the court to make those decisions. And I can tell you right now, the court's involvement in your family, unless you happen to be personal friends with, the one judge who was on it, which, by the way, they're just going to recuse themselves anyway. But let's just say that worked, right? They have no idea who you are, and they've got maybe 30 minutes of testimony from somebody, an hour or 2 days, whatever. But they have a much shorter and smaller sample size of what's going on. And I can guarantee you they're not going to have all the information. They're not going to know about the dumb decisions that somebody made in their 20s and has grown up from. They may just see the dumb decisions and make the ruling on that. Or they may not know about the dumb decisions in their 20s that somebody has not grown up from, but never got caught on that about that say, hey, I don't want that around my kid.
It's very complicated.
It is. There's a lot of nuance. And I said it's not that complicated, right? I said that on the front end because here's the deal. 99 times out of 100, what I tell my clients to do is I say this, pretend I'm not in the room. I'm going to count to 3. When I say 3, both of you say out loud who the person is who should be in charge of your kids. And I go 1, 2, 3, this is only if they don't have a decision, by the way. If they have a decision, we don't do this. And so many times they say the same person and they just thought the other person was going to say something else. I said, great, you guys agree, let's go. And if they don't, if they say different people, okay, well, here's your top 2. How do you feel about that? And usually you can come up with some sort of a decision on that. And if you can't, then you're one of the, 1 in 10 where the decision is not easy. I'm not saying you should flip a coin, but what I am saying is that any plan is usually better than no plan. And so an imperfect plan usually is going to do a better job of handling the situation than a lack of plan, right? Especially if you don't want your kid receiving a bunch of money in their late teens and early 20s and you want to push that money out.
I don't know about you, but there's no way at 18 could I inherit a bunch of money and be super responsible with it.
My wife could have.
Really?
Yeah, right.
How's that for a statement? I didn't say anything about me, but my wife could have.
Yeah.
She could have.
I want to do 2 things here. One, to just kind of pull off here. A lot of people think that this has to be a life event. This has to be like a 12-month decision. Does that make sense? Like you can always revisit this stuff. And I think that's a lot of the reasons why people are like, this is overwhelming. Well, just look at it as like an event that's going to happen and you're going to revisit this. And when you revisit it, you'll probably be alive. So you just have to figure this out for the next 12 months. Let's talk through it. Then when we want to change it, let's talk about it next 12 months after this. And where do we want to do it? Same, leave it. Different, change it. So it doesn't have to be this concrete, ironclad thing that you can't change. It's something that you can revisit often. Okay. So this is what I would say, because I think.
And one last thing on that.
Yeah.
Rely on your professional.
Yes.
Right. So when someone hires you, do they micromanage and or make all of their own investment decisions, or do they look at you and say, well, what do you think? And you say, well, here's a couple of choices, pick one, and they pick one usually, and they move on. It's the same thing with estate planning. I've done literally hundreds of these. I haven't counted. I might be closing in on 1,000. I don't know. I probably am because I've been doing this a while. I probably have done thousands of these. Guarantee you. And I came up with 4 that were different, right? Like out of that 1,000, maybe 0.5% aren't within the standard deviation. I guarantee you, if you come in and to a different estate planning attorney, whoever, and you sit down and say, this is my situation, they have a pretty good idea of how they want to handle it. I'm pretty good at saying, look, here's kind of your 3 main choices. Which one do you like? And then you pick one. And then you move on with your life and you throw it in the fire safe or the gun safe or the safe deposit box. And generally speaking, people look at it 15 years later and they're like, wow, I need to get that thing updated.
I think you
shouldn't wait that long, but
right.
they do.
I think that's good. Here's what I would say, because when you finally get all this stuff done, you finally get all your decisions made and you give it to Charles and everything's great. You still have to sign it. Like that is something that I think a lot of people think it's done and they haven't signed it.
That's true.
So I just want to make sure that people know, like, hey, sign this thing at the end of the rainbow, and then it is ironclad. Not ironclad, but then it's official. It's done.
It's a heck of a lot more ironclad than an unsigned will.
Yeah.
Right. Very true. Oh, Charlie, dude, thank you so much for just your wisdom and just your enthusiasm. I've personally used you. My wife and I, we enjoyed our time with you, and you made it very easy. And so thank you for doing that. I know it's something that I felt after I was done, I just felt like, okay, we're adulting. This was the right thing to do. And I've been like counseling people, like, you got to get this done. And I was like, okay, Philip, don't be duplicitous. Go get it done. So
listen, there's no judgment at all, because I told you that I had a kid on the way in law school, right? And so my second child was born during finals of my first semester of law school. My third child was born after I had my own law firm, and he was 18 months old before I had my own will. So there is no judgment when people come in. And my wife initiated the process, not me. She called me and was like, hey, so I'm like, oh, yep, come on in. I'll have it done by the time you get here.
Yeah.
There's not like these are super important documents. Everyone should have them. And look, if you're using an attorney who's judging you for not having them, it's like using a financial planner who's judging you for making the financial choices that you're making. Probably not a good fit, and you should talk to somebody else, because there shouldn't be any judgment. No, that's not true. Sometimes there is, but they should at least keep it to themselves, right? Like,
right. Good poker face. Okay, how do our listeners get just reach out to you if they want anything? How can they contact you?
Oh, sure. So my email address is cbottenberg, C as in Charlie, Bottenberg, B as in boy, OTTENBERG at Allers, AHLERS law.com. So that's cbottenberg at AllersLaw.com. Or my phone number is 515-246-0335. Happy to chat, happy to review, happy to sit down and have a discussion.
Send them funny text messages.
That's my office line, so that you can do that all you want. I'm not going to get them.
Yeah, let's do that.
I learned early to not give out the cell phone. That didn't end well. Right. But no, it's estate planning is a big puzzle. I view this as a big puzzle. People's lives are a big puzzle. How do I help you put the pieces together in the way that you want? It's what motivates me to get through my day. So it's a lot of fun, and I'm happy to work with anybody who needs help. Or if you listen to this and you said, hey, I need one of those, but that guy sounds like a jerk or I don't like him, give me a call and I'll give you the name of one of my friends who does it. This is not cutthroat. This is not like I have to, everyone has to use me, whatever. Let's get your documents in place so things are better. That's what we need to do.
Right. That's why you're on the show. I love your Uncommon. Thank you so much. You've been listening to the Uncommon Life Project. If you have any questions or any comments, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, go be uncommon.
Thanks.
That's all for this episode of the Uncommon Life Project, brought to you by Uncommon Wealth Partners. Be sure to visit uncommonwealth.com to learn more about our services. Don't miss an episode as we introduce you to inspiring people who are actively pursuing an uncommon life.